I also saw in vision a great throng which no one could count from every nation. And these are holding palm branches and singing this song, which we find also coming into the liturgy. They brought some of these canticles into the last canticle of Vespers instead of a psalm. Salvation is from our God, who is seated upon his throne, and from the Lamb. And so we have in the Apocalypse this cosmic vision of praise, the victory. When we were burying one of the brethren in France, there would be that notion of, as Churchill would have it, final victory in the air. There'd be no coffin, the body would be put there simply into the ground and the soil thrown over it. But the soul was rich with what carried weight at that point. What carries weight at that point? The bank balance, the number of followers on internet, the amount of fame in the media, the number of goals scored on the football field, 0. The soul at that point carries only what it has, and that is made of essentially merit through collaboration with divine grace, expressed for us in charity. Now, we can forget that bit, because no matter how holy, in inverted commas, a person may be, if that person is difficult to live with, if that person explodes, if that person is dysfunctional in his relationships, there's a jarring note. Whereas the simple person who doesn't do anything spectacular, but is always kind, helpful, and never causes pain, perhaps is getting there more quickly. Why? That person is remembering the Lord's simple, unique commandment of the Last Supper. A new commandment I give unto you. As far as I know, I've only met personally 2 human beings who are now canonized saints. One was in the year roughly 1970, still at school. We were on the ground in front of her, those who were still in school, in the big parish hall in one of the largest parishes in Cardiff. It was Mother Teresa, looking for co-workers. Easy to get on with, a sense of humour, and she pulled Father Lawrence's leg in public. Very human, I thought, but the real thing. And the one that actually was kind of adopted by her as a spiritual son, John Paul II, no else, because he knew that there were some who were adopting priests as spiritual mothers, and he said, I want Mother Teresa. And there's not that much of a difference between the date of their death. They understood each other perfectly well. And of course, as students, we would be always bumping into him. He was around for a long time. One time he came back to his university, the alma mater where we were, and gave us a lecture, and then went off the cuff. When I was here, I didn't see any women around. Very human. These have gone like rockets, with the same flesh and blood as we have. I understand that somebody I'm very keen on, of course never met, but nevertheless has something in common, insofar as when I was a student in Dublin, I was living there in the area and frequenting lectures in the Jesuit place, Milltown Park. And the chapel, I used to spend a lot of time actually quietly in prayer there between lectures, was a lovely chapel, quite big. And one of our own confreres had been ordained there. and also a lot of Jesuits, including John Sullivan and Willie Doyle. John Sullivan, of course, is now, I believe, canonized, isn't he? Or is he blessed? Can you correct me on that one? Blessed, is it? And now, Willie Doyle, his cause has just been opened, and I'm sure he'll get there like a rocket. I'm reading his life, and it's the real thing. It's unbelievable how charity came through in this soul. Of course, he was miraculously protected for a long time, until 1917. His work wasn't finished. Trench after trench, soul after soul, mangled body after mangled body, not one was allowed to escape without being anointed, and the bullets went round him. It was unbelievable, the charity that he had. And also, the wit, the actual hits of humour he had, even in the trenches, is out of this world. The things he was sending home, the humour that he had there in the trenches. Unbelievable how in that inferno Christian joy could break through. He was loved by the soldiers. If they saw him the last time, they died in peace. And they knew he'd always come wherever they were in the battlefield. And they'd stay alive until he came. Now, one I'm reading right now is very interesting. He was French, and he wasn't yet ordained when he volunteered to take his brother, who was also in the same congregation, his place in the mission to what was then the Sandwich Islands, now called Hawaii. So he went, and he was ordained upon getting to the area. He was only about 23. It's Father Damian. And his charity, again, is quite extraordinary. Listen just to this, which moved me, might move you as well, to indicate what it meant to care for those entrusted to him. Much of Father Damian's life in his second parish reads like a boy's own adventure story. One of the villages he wanted to visit was so isolated, decided the best way to get there would be by outrigger canoe across the sea. He set off with a few of his Hawaiian parishioners, but after quite a short time the canoe capsized in the high waves, and he and the others found themselves in the water. He wrote home prosaically that they managed quite easily to swim back to shore as they held on to the capsized canoe, and each of them took turns to beat the sharks off with the paddles. Nothing was lost, but his breviary was damaged beyond repair by the salt water, which he regretted. He decided he needed to recover from this trip, give himself a week before setting off again. This time he went on foot alone. He made the journey, which proved to be 4 days long, with a huge rucksack strapped on his back, in which he carried a portable altar, which he had designed and made himself. He had to wade and swim through the sea at various points, and then he came to a small mountain. He decided to climb it, holding on precariously to plants and stones, and in the process cutting his hands and feet on the sharp volcanic rock. When he reached the top, he found himself looking down into a ravine with no sign of any village. He climbed down into the ravine, and since he had come that far, up the other side. By this time his boots had been ripped to bits, and his hands and feet were torn and bleeding. On top of that, the rains had begun, and his way was now further hampered by mud, sometimes waist deep. There was still no sign of a village, but Damian had been assured it was there. So he started down the second ravine, and then up the third mountain. It was now too late to go back, he decided. At the top of the third mountain, he still saw no sign of any village, even in the distance. But he started down into the next valley. There he collapsed with exhaustion and exposure and lay unconscious in the pouring rain. He would have died there and then. But he had been found by the very villagers he was searching for. They revived him, and he was so overjoyed at seeing them that he was soon able to walk to their village, which in fact was quite close by, although too small to be visible from where he had collapsed. As soon as he had rested a little, he began to help with the work in the village, to the astonishment of those who had found him and thought him on the brink of death. He began to catechize, and many of the villagers accepted his preaching. Before he left, he helped the villagers build a church. Not a sort of hut, but as most of our chapels are, but built entirely of wood. He put a 2-meter-high cross on the top. Now, he was coming into a situation where there was a parallel evangelization going on from America. It was difficult. In these places, he was finding this problem of having to cope with other Christians and other bits of faith lingering around. He found his parishioners enthusiastically Catholic, except when they were being enthusiastically Presbyterian or Mormon, or when they were ill. Then they called in the local witch doctor. So we had to fight against what is now coming back to Ireland, and especially to Meath, as you know too well. Now, leprosy. Eventually, he volunteered to go to Molokai, the island where they were relegated, because they had to separate them. He knew what that meant, but he went precisely as an expression of the charity of Christ. And he was horrified. He started to live with them and to touch them, which of course was dangerous, a very contagious disease, bandage them and do everything personal for them. He was one of them. And of course, he had to anoint them. But what was his shock when it came to, now in those days, you remember, they had to anoint the 5 senses, and the feet were included. So he tried to find the feet, and what did he find? The first time he administered extreme unction on the island, he was horrified. When he came to anoint the man's feet, he found them already full of maggots. On it goes. And one sees here somebody who understood what it was to love, because his whole humanity came through in kindness. My friends, our context is what it is. different for everyone here. But the one command breaks through. In your context, in my context, each of us has to be love. And on that, we're examined. I've told you before, but I'll tell you again to help you. There was a nun, now actually canonized, Miriam, Marie de Jésus crucifiée, Carmelite, who died at the age of 32 with the stigmata and all the gifts. And it's through her that we have the present Carmel of Bethlehem, which the Lord himself designed as its architect. And she knew things about souls when they die. And there were surprises. Holy nuns that we thought would go straight up, but were in serious trouble. But this hidden nun whizzed. Oh, it was quite simple. During the whole of her religious life, not once did she ever lack in charity. That, my friends, we can do. Today, I also give thanks because it was 25 years ago that I celebrated my first Mass there, but the Abbey, now closed en masse, but it was a moving moment. And in the pre-Mass attention rite, there was a special celebration for it. It starts off the high altar with the Veni Creator, and in the responses, all in Latin, every time the new priest had to say something or do something, it was written in the margin, sponsus, 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 the spouse, the spouse, the spouse. Married to the church. Now that could be also somebody's call here. If that same spirit is moving over you, don't dismiss it. There's nothing greater a man can do in this world than become, for others, Christ. God is not changed. His grace is still the same, hovering in the air. We're all homeward bound, my friend. Let's get there, safe and sound.
Procedi. catholicam et apostolicam ecclesiam